Daniel had always believed that maintaining a polite, respectful relationship with his mother-in-law, Marissa, was simply part of being a good husband. She was sharp-witted, elegant, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime getting her way. Though she often interfered with Elena's decisions and made passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern, Daniel never challenged her. He assumed it was easier to endure her scrutiny than spark unnecessary conflict. But everything changed the moment Elena left for her 2-week business trip. On the morning Elena departed, Marissa stayed unusually long at their house, offering Daniel unsolicited advice about cooking, cleaning, and not letting the place turn into a bachelor cave. Her tone was playful but commanding. Daniel laughed it off, thinking she was merely being her usual overbearing self. But as the front door closed and he found himself alone, he didn't expect her presence to linger, not in his mind, and certainly not in his home. That very evening, Marissa showed up unannounced with a covered dish, insisting Daniel shouldn't eat alone. He thanked her, though he felt mildly uncomfortable. Her gaze lingered longer than usual, as if she were studying him. She complimented his shirt, his haircut, even the way he set the table. None of it sounded inappropriate, yet the tone felt different, softer, too familiar. Over the next few days, her visits increased. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she claimed she just happened to be in the neighborhood. Other times, she simply let herself inside using the spare key Elena had trusted her with. Daniel never protested. He didn't know how. Marissa had a way of speaking that made resistance feel rude, even childish. "Your wife is lucky," she told him one afternoon while rearranging the flowers she had brought. "Most men don't keep a house this tidy, or look this good doing it." Daniel froze. It wasn't what she said, it was the way she said it, her eyes lingering. Her lips curved into a smile that held a meaning he didn't want to interpret. He tried to laugh, brushing the comment aside, but Marissa stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell her perfume. For the first time, he felt a boundary shift. Daniel later tried convincing himself he had misread the moment. Marissa was dramatic by nature. She enjoyed stirring reactions, making people a little uncomfortable. Maybe this was just another one of her quirks, but the pit in his stomach wouldn't ease. That evening, he called Elena, hoping the sound of her voice would steady him. She was exhausted from the trip, barely able to keep her eyes open. Daniel didn't burden her with his concern. He didn't want to sound paranoid, but as the days continued, the atmosphere between him and Marissa grew heavier, charged with something he couldn't name, something intentional. It was only the beginning. But deep down, Daniel sensed one truth. A line had been crossed, and whatever came next would be harder to avoid than he wanted to admit. As the days went by, Daniel began noticing that Marissa's visits were no longer just about helping or checking in. There was a subtle but unmistakable shift in her demeanor, a closeness that felt deliberate. She lingered longer in the house, often finding reasons to stay even after Daniel offered polite excuses. She complimented him more often, sometimes on things as trivial as the way he poured his morning coffee or the slight crease of his shirt. At first, Daniel tried to laugh it off, telling himself that it was just his imagination. After all, she had always been theatrical. But deep down, a sense of unease gnawed at him. One evening, as Daniel was fixing a simple dinner, Marissa appeared, claiming she had brought a new recipe she thought he'd appreciate. As she moved around the kitchen, she commented on his posture, his hand movements, and even the tone of his voice. Daniel felt a strange tension. Her words were harmless, yet there was an intimacy to her attention that made him acutely aware of the space between them. Every glance lingered just a fraction too long, and every touch brief, incidental, or so it seemed, made his heart pound. Her conversation began to drift into personal territory. Marissa spoke about her loneliness. about the ways she felt overlooked in her marriage and how little attention she had received from her husband over the years. She told Daniel things that no mother-in-law should, sharing vulnerabilities in a way that seemed designed to pull him in emotionally. She would pause, look at him as if expecting an understanding response, and laugh softly at his awkward replies. Daniel, already feeling trapped by the intensity of her gaze and the weight of her presence, couldn't help but feel an odd mixture of sympathy, discomfort, and fear. One evening, she brought a bottle of wine. "We could use some company," she said, smiling in a way that made it clear she wanted more than casual companionship. Daniel felt frozen. His instincts screamed that this was inappropriate, yet he hesitated to reject her. There was something about her tone, a subtle pressure beneath the politeness, that made him doubt his own judgment. He tried to maintain casual conversation, but every sentence he spoke seemed to draw her closer. The air between them was charged, and Daniel realized that what had once been minor discomfort was turning into an almost palpable tension. He began to notice that she seemed to seek these moments deliberately, waiting for him alone in the house, or offering to stay late under the guise of helping with chores. Every encounter made him feel cornered, yet he couldn't find a way to confront her directly. The fear of ruining the family dynamic, combined with the shame he felt for the stirrings her presence elicited in him, left him paralyzed. The line had not just been tested, it had been blurred by the end of the week. Daniel understood that he was no longer imagining things. Marissa's behavior was intentional, calculated, and probing. It was as though she were daring him to react, to show weakness, or to acknowledge the growing tension between them. Daniel knew that the coming days would require constant vigilance, but deep down, he feared that the situation might already be spiraling out of his control. The day it all changed began like any other. Daniel had spent the morning trying to focus on work and household chores, constantly aware of Marissa's looming presence. She had stopped dropping by casually now. Her visits seemed timed, precise, as if she were orchestrating them. That afternoon, she arrived with a pretense of helping him reorganize the living room, her movements purposeful and unhurried. Daniel could feel the air thickening, the space between them charged with something neither entirely spoken nor entirely denied. Marissa began speaking about herself in a way that left Daniel unprepared. She confided in him about long-suppressed regrets, her isolation, and her sense of unfulfilled desire in her marriage. Her voice was soft but insistent, and she fixed him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through his self-control. She lingered near him as he placed books on the shelf, her hand brushing against his arm accidentally several times, yet intentionally enough to make his pulse quicken. Daniel's rational mind screamed at him to step away, to end the interaction immediately, but his body betrayed him, reacting to her calculated attention. The turning point came when she sat close on the couch, her proximity unnerving him. She leaned in and whispered things that were meant to manipulate, to entice, to break the invisible barrier that should have existed between them. Her words were a mixture of admiration and suggestion, layered with a vulnerability that tugged at Daniel's conscience and his ego at the same time. He felt trapped. The wrong word could offend her. The wrong move could escalate things. And yet standing still was impossible. Daniel made a choice, a momentary lapse that would haunt him forever. Overwhelmed, conflicted, and emotionally exhausted, he responded in a way he never should have. There was no premeditation, only the raw human weakness of someone caught between fear, curiosity, and temptation. For a fleeting moment, Marissa's expression seemed satisfied, triumphant even, while Daniel immediately felt the sharp pang of guilt. The realization struck him like lightning. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. As he stepped back, trying to regain composure, he noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift in Marissa's demeanor. She was calm, almost serene, as though she had expected this all along. Daniel, by contrast, was consumed by shame, terror, and disbelief at his own inability to resist the moment. His mind raced with thoughts of Elena, her trust, her love, the life they had built together. Every instinct told him that he had just endangered everything he valued, and yet he couldn't undo it. The remainder of the day passed in a tense fog. Marissa acted as though nothing had happened, moving through the house with her usual poise and charm, but her occasional glances at Daniel carried a silent acknowledgement of the secret they now shared. Daniel's guilt grew heavier with each tick of the clock. He understood that what happened wasn't merely a fleeting mistake, it was the beginning of a downward spiral, a chain of consequences he could neither predict nor fully control. By nightfall, Daniel was left alone with his thoughts, haunted by the truth he now carried. One thing was certain, the dynamic between him and Marissa had changed forever, and the fragile balance of trust, loyalty, and family had been irrevocably disturbed. After that irreversible moment, Daniel found himself trapped in a constant state of anxiety. The house, which had once been a place of comfort and routine, now felt claustrophobic. Every sound, the click of the lock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant footsteps on the street seemed amplified, as if alerting him to the fact that Marissa was always watching, always aware. And in a way, she was. She moved through the home with the same polished, controlled grace, yet her eyes held a quiet satisfaction, a reminder that she knew something Daniel could barely admit to himself. Marissa's behavior shifted subtly but unmistakably. She began leaving small hints of her knowledge, testing Daniel's limits and reinforcing the unspoken bond they now shared. A lingering touch on his arm, a comment that suggested intimacy but could be explained away, even the casual mention. A thing she hoped he wouldn't tell Elena, all of it became part of a silent game. Daniel felt cornered. He wanted to avoid her entirely, to retreat into work or solitude. But Marissa had a way of finding him, of inserting herself into the spaces where he tried to feel safe. At first, Daniel attempted to maintain normalcy. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, and answered her probing questions with vague politeness. But no matter how careful he was, he sensed Marissa's calculated gaze assessing every move. Her presence became suffocating, her control over the home and his emotions undeniable. It was no longer just about inappropriate attention. It was about power. She reminded him, in subtle ways, that she could expose the secret they now shared, or twist it in ways that made him appear culpable. Daniel's guilt intensified when he spoke to Elena on the phone. Her voice, warm and tired from business meetings, contrasted sharply with the tension lingering in the house. He longed to tell her everything, to release the burden of shame, but fear paralyzed him. The thought of Marissa manipulating the truth, of Elena seeing him as a predator rather than a victim of circumstance, was unbearable. So he stayed silent, caught between the weight of his actions and the impossible task of maintaining appearances. Psychological strain began affecting Daniel's daily life. He became jumpy, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. His sleep was plagued by dreams in which Marissa's presence was inescapable, her face calm but piercing, her voice whispering threats and temptations in equal measure. He realized that the secret was no longer just a private shame, it had infiltrated every room, every thought, every decision he made. By the end of this period, Daniel understood a terrifying truth. Marissa's influence extended beyond her physical presence. She had embedded herself into his mind, and the secret they shared had altered the very fabric of his home. The walls that once symbolized comfort and safety now seemed to echo with judgment, anticipation, and the possibility of exposure. Had entered a psychological trap, and every attempt to escape risked triggering Marissa's carefully concealed but powerful control. In the quiet moments, Daniel could almost hear her voice saying what she didn't. "You can't get away now." Not entirely. Not without consequences. And he knew she was right. The secret had taken hold, and the house and his life would never be the same. Daniel soon realized that hiding the truth was no longer simply about preserving appearances, it was about survival. Marissa had shifted from subtle hints and fleeting touches to quiet but unmistakable assertions of control. She seemed to understand the exact points of his weakness, his desire to do right by Elena, his guilt over what had happened, and his desperate need to maintain family harmony. She exploited each of these with precision, often in ways so subtle that Daniel struggled to pinpoint them as manipulation until much later. It began with offhand remarks designed to keep him obedient and fearful. "It would be a shame if Elena ever misunderstood us," she said casually while helping with chores, her tone light but the meaning unmistakable. Every comment carried the weight of a threat, wrapped in the pretense of advice or concern. Daniel's stomach churned every time she spoke, knowing that she could unravel the fragile trust he had with his wife in a single moment. The secret, once a private burden, now had the power to dominate his life. Marissa's boldness grew steadily. She started orchestrating moments that forced Daniel into uncomfortable proximity with her. She lingered in the kitchen while he cooked, brushed past him in the hallway, and sometimes, in a rare show of vulnerability, revealed personal details meant to bind him emotionally. Each interaction was carefully calculated, a mixture of seduction, manipulation, and psychological control that left Daniel feeling powerless. He recognized the pattern but found himself incapable of breaking it. Attempting to distance himself only provoked subtle, cold reminders that she was in charge. The tension reached a breaking point when Elena unexpectedly announced she would return earlier than planned. Panic consumed Daniel. He now had to consider not only the secret he carried, but also the unpredictable reactions of Marissa. Would she try to shift blame? Expose the truth in a distorted way? Use the situation to assert dominance over him? The mere thought sent shivers down his spine. Every option seemed perilous. Marissa, ever observant, sensed his anxiety and capitalized on it. Her tone shifted, no longer flirtatious or vulnerable, but quietly menacing. "Be careful what you decide, Daniel," she murmured one evening while he tried to avoid her gaze. The warning was subtle yet chilling. It reminded him that she held the power to influence not just his emotions, but the very future of his marriage. He realized that the secret was no longer a matter of private guilt. It had become a weapon she wielded with precision. Daniel's life narrowed into a series of tense calculations. Every word he spoke, every interaction with Marissa, and every thought about Elena became fraught with risk. He knew he could not continue as if nothing had changed. The hidden truth had exacted its price. He had lost freedom, peace of mind, and the security of his home. The psychological toll was immense, and Daniel understood that whatever decisions he made next would carry consequences far beyond what he had ever imagined. By the end of this period, one realization haunted him. The secret was no longer just his burden, it was Marissa's weapon. And until it was revealed, controlled, or confronted, Daniel would remain trapped in her meticulously constructed web. The cost of silence had become higher than he could bear. Helena's early return shattered the fragile equilibrium Daniel had struggled to maintain. The house, once suffused with tension and secretive glances, now felt like a stage under harsh, unforgiving lights. Daniel had spent days rehearsing what he might say, how he might confess, and how he could frame the truth to minimize the fallout. But standing in the doorway as Elena hugged him, he felt the weight of everything crash down, heavier than any preparation could have relieved. The secret was no longer just between him and Marissa, it had grown into a living, breathing presence that demanded acknowledgement. Marissa, ever observant, had already positioned herself as the silent shadow of the household. Her eyes held a mixture of triumph and caution. She had orchestrated this moment in her mind countless times, and now it had arrived. Daniel felt trapped between two forces: the guilt and love he carried for Elena, and the looming threat of Marissa's manipulative control. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to hide, or to pretend nothing had occurred. But he knew he could not endure another day living in that suffocating tension. With trembling hands and a voice caught between fear and shame, Daniel confessed. He spoke slowly, recounting the emotional entanglement, the impulsive moment, and Marissa's continued manipulation. Elena's reaction was immediate and devastating. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with hurt and betrayal. The warmth of her embrace, once so familiar, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold distance that pierced deeper than any argument could. She listened silently at first, then erupted in anger, demanding details, explanations, and clarity. Daniel realized that no matter how he framed the confession, the trust he had shattered would take years to rebuild, if it could ever be restored at all. Marissa's response was explosive yet calculated. She denied certain actions while emphasizing others, twisting the narrative to portray herself as a victim of circumstance and Daniel as the one who had faltered. Her manipulation threatened to tip the scales, further confusing Elena and deepening the rift. Daniel had always feared this moment, and now it had arrived in full force. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility. He had caused this fracture, and no one else could repair it. The fallout was immediate. Elena withdrew, creating an emotional distance Daniel had never known. Marissa, sensing the chaos she had sown, retreated into a poised calm, leaving Daniel alone with his remorse. Every room of the house, once a sanctuary, now felt tainted by the consequences of his actions. He understood, painfully, that silence and secrecy had allowed this situation to escalate beyond his control, and that confronting the truth even, in full honesty, could not undo the damage already done. By the end of the story, Daniel is left to navigate the ruins of trust and familial bonds. The home that once represented safety and love now serves as a reminder of human weakness, temptation, and the devastating power of manipulation. The lesson is stark. Infidelity in all its forms does not only break vows, it reshapes lives, changes relationships irrevocably, and leaves scars that take